It's been a very helpful debate. We have been outlining the positives we all recognise in Northern Ireland. Yet, however, we have also highlighted the dangers that still face many of the law-abiding citizens and our constituents. We are thankful that things are not as they used to be. Nevertheless, we must not let our guard down, and we must not be complacent. Whilst many, including those within government, call these terrorist dissidents, let us not forget that many of these same terrorists were players trained in the knowledge and practice of terrorism by the provisional IRA leadership. Before dealing specifically, Mr Deputy Speaker, with the motion, can I acknowledge the valuable contributions from many across the House raising their voices in condemnation of the brutal murder of Mr David Black, a gentleman I had the privilege of knowing personally, being from the town in which I was educated and formed part of my former constituency of Medulster that I represented in this House for 14.5 years. Sadly, since 1997, that constituency has never had a voice in this House. The only beneficiaries are the coffers of Sinn Féin, without having to give representation here. Yes. I thank my right honourable friend from North Belfast for his opening speech, in which he skilfully and professionally set out the backcloth for our motion. I also thank the other members that participated. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for her thoughtful speech identifying the remarkable progress that few could ever have imagined in Northern Ireland, and that is right. I also noted that she acknowledged the arrest of 2 persons from Collisland in relationship to the murder of Mr David Black. I'd also remind her, however, that recently other buildings were found hoarding weapons of war nearby in the same Collisland area. And it's interesting, it would be interesting to know how much public money was received to erect or to rent those properties, and I think that deeper investigation should be looked into in that particular situation. I think that her remarks as regards a number of terrorists that have been arrested and the prosecutions identify that this is not an insignificant terrorist group, but indeed does pose a terrorist threat. I'd like to thank the Shadow Secretary of State for acknowledging that things have changed significantly and that we have a confident Northern Ireland that is confident on the world stage. And I think the announcement that the Prime Minister, the excellent announcement the Prime Minister was able to make yesterday concerning the G8, certainly proves that confidence, not only within Northern Ireland itself, but also within the United Kingdom, as the Prime Minister projects Northern Ireland across the world in bringing world leaders to our province. I'd like to thank also the Honourable Member for Eastbourne for his participation and the personal knowledge which he has expressed in this matter. The Honourable Lady for North Down in her very valuable intervention concerning the inventory of terrorist weaponry, because we do need the greatest possible transparency, and also a garden of remembrance for prison officers. Those are excellent matters that need to be brought up in this debate, and I thank her for that. The Honourable Member for East Londonderry pointed to the remarkable achievement, again, not to underestimate the capacity of Republicans to create serious problems to life and to property, bearing in mind also the significant events that happened in the past year. Thankfully, that certainly put us on the world stage for the right reason, but also looking forward to remarkable events that are still planned to come. Also, the Honourable Member for Upper Bann pointing out that most members of this House know nothing of what it is to have to look under their cars and to exercise personal security because you happen to be deemed to be an opponent of the Republican terrorists. And I think that is a fact of reality that many in this House have never grasped, even in the darkest days of our province. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for East Belfast, and certainly we do not want to point to Northern Ireland as the back and the dark ages that we did come through. But indeed it is right to say to her that I can assure her that my right honourable friends and friends in the Executive will work with her Minister Mr. Ford and all the colleagues in the executive will work very closely with our party leader, Security Minister Mr. Ford, in the efforts to give political leadership to the PSNI and the prison service at these very challenging times. The honourable member for North Antrim certainly spoke about the harrowing times of the past and the miracle of the present situation, and indeed identified some of us as the grandparents that certainly would never want to see our children, and I'm proud to say with 9 grandchildren that I certainly do not want my grandchildren to go through the dark days which my children had to go through in our home whenever we were constantly under threat by the terrorists in Northern Ireland. I'd like to thank the honourable member for Foyle, and I do accept there is no acceptable level of violence. There never was, there never will be. Absolutely. Terrorism was an evil in our midst, and terrorism is an evil in our midst, and all must equally condemn it, and no one must allow to sanitise the evil of the past. I'd like to make mention of the honourable member for South Down. Whilst I disagreed with some of her remarks, I would have to suggest to the honourable lady that it is always a good thing that when you have the opportunity, and use it quite often, to give insults, it's always best to be able to take criticism whenever criticism is due, and I think that is a good lesson for her to go. But there is one lesson from her that I would suggest to her in her evidence of why that her colleagues in certain places supported McGill, who tried to murder my colleague in Dungannon Council. I'd have to say this: the lesson of the past is this: you cannot go soft on terrorists. You cannot go soft on those who actually have gone through the courts. And whenever they go through the courts, then they certainly have got to spend the time in prison, and therefore, no, I'm trying to answer all the. Well, yes, I did mention.
Well, I think could I thank the honourable member for South Antrim for giving way, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and could I remind the honourable member of one person who died, obviously in very tragic circumstances, and who certain people had associations with, Mr. Billy Wright.
Well, I would say that certainly is a very serious charge, which proves it's an appalling charge and a lying charge. And can I say this, that as far as there's a charge that should not have been made in this House. But what I would say to the honourable lady is this: I was a member. No, I will not. I was a member of the Macrophil District Council whenever the young soldiers were murdered at Warren Point. It was an SDLP member, it's recorded in the minutes of the council, who said, "I will not shed a tear over the murder of those soldiers at Warren Point." He did, SDLP member, it's recorded in the minutes. And I would also say that when he was challenged why he would say such a thing, the SDLP member replied, and I quote, "because they weren't Irish." And I think that was despicable. And I'm happy that she goes to the minutes of the council way back in Macrophil. I was there, she was not. The DUP motion rightly commences. The DUP motion rightly commences with our expression of deepest sympathy to the family of prison officer David Black. This murder represents an attack upon society as a whole. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was absolutely stunned on hearing the tragic news of the despicable murder of another innocent victim of IRA murder and terror. David was a public servant who gave honourable and unstinting service to the prison service. Unlike the cowards who murdered him, David exemplified all that is good in Ulster people, doing his duty with integrity, decency and bravery. We all know a car with Dublin registration plates pulled up alongside David as he travelled between Portadown and Lurgan on the M1 motorway, and sadly David was shot dead. In other words, he was brutally murdered. Unlike most, if not all, people in this House, I had the personal privilege of knowing David. I counted him and his wife's family circle personal friends. He was a loving husband to Yvonne. He was a devoted father to Kyle and Kyra. He was a caring son and brother. But the murderers didn't care about these excellent characteristics or credentials of David Black. All they had was the lust for blood. Vile murder was in their heart. To Yvonne, Kyle, Cara, his elderly parents and sister, I offer my heartfelt sympathy, having walked this lonely pathway to the graveside of my own loved ones. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this was indeed a cold-blooded and callous murder, but it must be remembered so were the murders of the other 29 prison officers who were butchered by terrorists, mainly the Provisional IRA. Those who murdered all these prison officers, police officers, UDR members, innocent civilians, are equally repugnant and evil, and no elevation to high office or elected office can remove the stain from their conscience or erase the record from the eternal book that one day will be opened in the day of judgment before the Almighty Judge, where justice will finally be handed out. I congratulate the family, for the Black family, for the dignity they displayed before, during and after the funeral of David. And I pray that God will give them strength day by day to face the future. But I can assure them that's not easy. They made it clear to all that they did not desire revenge, but they do want justice to be done and those responsible to be found guilty. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these Republican terrorists will not be satisfied with the murder of Constable Stephen Carroll, Ronan Kerr, Patrick Azamkar, Mark Quincy at the Mazarine Barracks in my constituency, or the attempted murder of my constituent, Constable Peter Heffron, or the numerous failed attempts on several members of the security forces. No, they are a part of the death squads of hate, and therefore the law-abiding community has a right to look to government for security and protection. I appreciate that policing was devolved to Stormont, but national security, including the people of Northern Ireland, is still the responsibility of this House. Therefore, it is important that a united voice goes out from this House in condemnation of the violence that is daily being planned by various Republican terrorist groups against the vast majority of people who simply desire to build a peaceful future. Indeed, many are finding it hard to cope with the economic downturn across Europe, the challenges of daily living, including the possibility of some having to join the unemployment queues for the first time ever in their lives. When I look across the province, I see enough suffering, sickness and hurt among families, and I cannot comprehend why there are those who simply spend their energies scheming evil, desiring only to add grief, harassment, intimidation, terror and murder to our community. We in Northern Ireland are a resilient people. Indeed, we proved this. We withstood over 30 years of provisional IRA bombs and bullets. Nevertheless, we resolutely faced these to achieve our right to remain part of this United Kingdom. And our legitimacy as Unionists, Mr. Deputy Speaker, unlike what the honourable member mentioned from Foyle, is not that the Unionist people of Northern Ireland desire to be a part of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales desire to be a part of that United Kingdom. That is our legitimacy, because indeed, which will be proven shortly whenever a referendum does come to pass, that the people of Scotland realise that we are stronger together than what we would be apart. However, we do need help. We urgently need the government here to work closely with the Northern Ireland Executive to provide the fullest possible protection to members of the prison service and the security, the police officers in general, both serving members and ex-members. Some 2 years ago, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer agreed additional access to Treasury reserves, $200 million over a 4-year period to assist in the fight against Republican terrorist groups. I appreciate the fact that 2 years' money have been drawn down and that 2 years are yet to follow. But the threat has not diminished in our province to the point that there may not be need for extra money from the reserve, the Treasury Reserve Fund. And I ask, therefore, that those resources to allow the police service to plan regarding necessary equipment, personnel resources, that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister give a commitment that as long as the security situation demands, access to additional Treasury revenue funds will be available. We also need to be assured that all measures will be taken to combat and defeat the threat posed by these terrorist organisations. We must not let our province slip back into the cycle of murder and mayhem. We therefore must be determined to protect our community. Perhaps a few practical suggestions would be helpful in conclusion. Many ex-prison officers and ex-police officers are living in vulnerable areas of the province, yet they have had their PPWs removed. This is disgraceful. Many at the end of the sterling service throughout years of terrorism and intimidation were told to hand over their PPWs, security measures removed from their homes, and in place they were handed a leaflet on personal protection, how they could look after themselves. Perhaps the Secretary of State or the Minister winding up could tell the House how many PPWs have been removed from ex-service police officers, prison officers, UDR or RIR personnel. A few weeks ago, the Home Office stated the threat from dissident IRA groups had lowered on the mainland. I welcome the fact, if that is the case, that the threat has been reduced. But we need to exercise care in how we communicate that news. These sick, murdering maniacs can consider such language as putting it up to them and can therefore be counterproductive. Indeed, it was after that announcement my friend David Black was brutally murdered. Whilst we must highlight the security threat, we must also put on record how pleased we are to have the opportunity to welcome the world leaders of the G8 to our beautiful province. I can assure them, and I can assure this House, our province has much to offer. We have much to give. We will do all within our power to ensure the world knows that Northern Ireland is and can continue, irrespective of any terrorist threat, will be open for business.
Yeah. Minister Penning. Yeah.